It's the spring of 1944. The war in Europe is at a fever pitch. Allied armies are pushing toward the heart of Nazi Germany, but every mile is paid for in blood. The German Wehrmacht, battered but not broken, is fighting a desperate defense. Artillery lines hidden in forests and behind hills, rain shells on advancing troops. For the men on the ground, these guns are a nightmare, silent, invisible, and deadly. But in the sky above, a new kind of hero is about to make history. This is the story of one pilot, one plane, and one mission that would become legend. Not because it followed the rules, but because it broke them. Our story begins at a muddy Allied airfield somewhere in France. The pilot, let's call him Captain Jack Hawk Harrison, was a veteran by 1944, but he still felt the nerves before every mission. He'd flown dozens of sorties in his rugged P-47 Thunderbolt, strafing trains, attacking convoys, and dueling with enemy fighters. But today's mission was different. Intelligence had pinpointed a hidden German artillery line that was decimating Allied columns on a key supply road. The guns had to be taken out, but previous airstrikes had failed. The Germans were experts at camouflage, and their anti-aircraft gunners were deadly accurate. The briefing was tense. The squadron leader laid out the plan: a high-altitude approach, a dive-bombing run, and a quick escape. But Jack had his doubts. He'd seen too many missions go wrong, bombs missing their mark, flak tearing planes apart, and the artillery surviving to fire again. As the pilots filed out, Jack lingered, studying the map. He noticed something: a line of hills and a patch of dense forest that ran right up to the German positions. An idea began to form. A crazy, dangerous idea. Jack found his crew chief, checked over his Thunderbolt, and loaded up with 50 caliber ammo and a pair of 500-pound bombs. He said nothing about his plan. As he taxied out, he could feel the weight of the mission and the risk he was about to take. The sky was overcast, the air thick with tension. Jack climbed to 5,000 feet, then banked away from the rest of the formation. He dropped lower, hugging the contours of the land, using every hill and tree line for cover. This was nap of the earth flying, so low that the wingtips seemed to brush the grass, so close to the ground that radar and spotters would have a hard time picking him up. It was a maneuver that was strictly forbidden in the official playbook. Too dangerous, too unpredictable, too easy to crash. But Jack knew it was his best shot at getting close without being seen. As he approached the target area, Jack's heart pounded. He could see the smoke from the German guns, hear the distant rumble of artillery. He dropped even lower, weaving between trees, skimming over hedgerows, and ducking behind a ridge. The world became a blur of green and brown, the ground rushing past at 300 miles per hour. Suddenly the forest opened up, and there they were. A line of German artillery pieces, perfectly camouflaged, their barrels pointed toward the Allied lines. Jack had only seconds to act. He pushed the throttle forward, lined up his guns, and squeezed the trigger. The Thunderbolt's 850 caliber machine guns roared, sending a hail of bullets into the enemy positions. Gunners scattered, shells exploded, and the artillery line erupted in chaos. Jack pulled up, banked hard, and came around for another pass. This time, he dropped his bombs, scoring a direct hit on the center of the battery. The explosion sent debris flying, and the remaining guns fell silent. In less than 2 minutes, the entire artillery line was destroyed. As Jack climbed away, he could see the results of his attack: burning guns, fleeing soldiers, and a gap in the German defenses. He radioed back to base, his voice shaking with adrenaline. Target destroyed. Artillery neutralized. Returning to base. The flight home was a blur. Jack replayed the mission in his mind, hardly believing what he'd done. He knew he'd broken the rules, risked his life, and put his career on the line. But he also knew he'd saved countless Allied lives and changed the course of the battle. Back at the airfield, Jack's squadron was stunned. The intelligence officers couldn't believe the report. The ground troops, who had been pinned down for days, cheered as the shelling stopped. Jack's commanding officer called him in for a debriefing. "You know that was an illegal maneuver, right?" the colonel said, half angry, half awed. Jack nodded. "Yes, sir, but it worked." Word of the mission spread quickly. Other pilots wanted to know how he'd done it. Some called him reckless, others called him a genius. The story made its way up the chain of command, and soon Jack was being asked to brief other squadrons on nap of the earth tactics. The mission became legendary, not just for its audacity, but for its tactical brilliance. But for Jack, the real reward was knowing he'd made a difference. He'd seen the faces of the infantrymen as they advanced past the wrecked guns. He'd heard the gratitude in their voices. He knew that sometimes breaking the rules was the only way to win. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into the science and skill behind nap of the earth flying. We'll explore how pilots learned to use the terrain to their advantage, the risks they faced, and the split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. We'll also look at how these tactics evolved throughout the war and why they remain a key part of air combat to this day. Nap of the earth flying, sometimes called contour flying or terrain masking, is one of the most daring and dangerous maneuvers in a pilot ES playbook. It's the art of flying as low as possible, using the natural features of the land, hills, valleys, forests, and even buildings, to hide from enemy eyes and radar. In World War II, it was a tactic born of necessity, refined by experience, and for pilots like Captain Jack "Hawk" Harrison, the key to pulling off missions that seemed impossible. But what does it really take to fly nap of the earth? Why was it considered illegal or forbidden by so many commanders? And how did pilots learn to use this risky technique to their advantage? Let's start with the basics. In the early years of WWII, most air attacks were carried out from medium or high altitude. Bombers and fighters would approach their targets from above, relying on speed, altitude, and formation, flying to protect themselves from anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters. But as the war dragged on, the enemy adapted. German flak batteries became more accurate, radar-guided searchlights swept the skies, and enemy fighters learned to intercept bombers before they could reach their targets. Pilots needed a new way to get close without being seen. That's where nap of the earth flying came in. By hugging the ground, pilots could use the terrain to break up their radar signature, avoid detection, and approach targets from unexpected directions. Hills and forests blocked the line of sight for enemy gunners and spotters. Rivers and valleys provided natural corridors for low-level flight. Even the shadows of trees and buildings could help a pilot stay hidden until the last possible moment. But flying this low is incredibly risky. At 200, 100, or even 50 feet above the ground, there's no margin for error. A split-second lapse in concentration, a gust of wind, or a misjudged turn could send a plane crashing into the earth. Power lines, trees, and even flocks of birds became deadly obstacles. Pilots had to constantly adjust their speed, altitude, and heading, reading the land like a map and making split-second decisions. For most air forces, nap of the earth flying was considered illegal, or at least highly discouraged. The risks were simply too great. Training manuals warned against it, and many commanders forbade their pilots from flying so low unless absolutely necessary. But for some, like Jack Harrison, the rewards outweighed the risks. If you could get in close, undetected, you could strike a target with devastating surprise, and maybe make it home alive. Learning to fly nap of the earth wasn't something you picked up in flight school. It was a skill honed in combat, passed down from veteran to rookie, and refined through trial and error. Pilots practiced by flying low over friendly territory, using rivers, roads, and railroad tracks as guides. They learned to read the land, to anticipate changes in elevation, and to use every feature to their advantage. Some even developed their own tricks, like using the sun to blind enemy gunners, or timing their approach to coincide with artillery barrages or other distractions. The key to success was discipline and focus. Pilots had to trust their instincts, their training, and their machines. They had to know exactly how low they could go, how fast they could fly, and how much punishment their planes could take. They had to be ready to pull up at a moment's notice, to dodge obstacles and to recover from a near miss. And they had to do it all while keeping their eyes on the target and their minds on the mission. For Jack Harrison, nap of the earth flying was both a science and an art. He knew the risks, he'd lost friends to low-level crashes, and he'd seen the wreckage of planes that had clipped a tree or hit a power line. But he also knew the rewards. On his legendary mission, he used every trick he'd learned, following a riverbed to stay hidden, using a line of trees to mask his approach, and timing his attack to catch the enemy off guard. The moment of truth came as he crested a low hill and saw the German artillery line spread out below him. He had only seconds to line up his guns, release his bombs, and pull up before the enemy could react. The element of surprise was total. The German gunners, focused on the distant horizon, never saw him coming. In a matter of minutes, the entire battery was destroyed. The aftermath of the attack was chaos. Survivors described the scene as apocalyptic, guns burning, ammunition exploding, and soldiers fleeing in every direction. For the Allied troops on the ground, the sudden silence from the enemy guns was a miracle. For the Germans, it was a shock, a reminder that nowhere was truly safe, not even behind the front lines. Jack's mission became the talk of the squadron. Other pilots wanted to know how he'd done it, what it felt like, and whether he'd do it again. Some called him reckless, others called him a genius. The debate raged in mess halls and briefing rooms. Was Nap of the Earth flying worth the risk? Should it be taught or banned? The answer, as always, depended on the mission, the pilot, and the circumstances. For some targets, like hidden artillery, supply convoys, or command posts, low-level attacks were the only way to guarantee success. For others, the risks outweighed the rewards. But one thing was clear. Nap of the Earth flying had changed the game. It gave pilots a new tool, a new way to strike at the enemy, and a new sense of control over their own fate. The tactic also forced the enemy to adapt. German gunners began to dig in deeper, to camouflage their positions more carefully, and to set up obstacles like cables and poles to deter low-flying planes. Radar operators adjusted their settings, and fighter pilots learned to patrol at lower altitudes. The arms race between attacker and defender continued, each side searching for an edge. For Jack Harrison, the mission was a turning point. He became a legend in his own squadron, a symbol of what was possible when skill, courage, and a little bit of luck came together. But he also knew the cost. He'd seen the wreckage of planes that hadn't made it, and he never forgot the risks he'd taken. In the end, he believed that Nap of the Earth flying was a tool, one to be used wisely, with respect for the dangers and a clear understanding of the mission. In the next section, we'll break down the attack itself, step by step. We'll follow Jack as he approaches the target, lines up his run, and unleashes the firepower that erased an entire German artillery line. We'll see the battle from both the air and the ground, and we'll hear from the men who witnessed the attack and lived to tell the tale. The morning of the mission, Jack Hawk Harrison's nerves were electric. He'd made his decision. He would fly Nap of the Earth, hugging the ground, using every hill and tree for cover. He knew the risks. One wrong move and he'd be a smoking crater. But he also knew that a standard high-altitude attack would likely fail. The German artillery line was too well hidden, too well defended, and too important to leave standing. Jack's P-47 Thunderbolt was loaded for bear, 2 500-pound bombs under the wings, a full load of .50 caliber ammunition, and extra fuel for the long, low-level flight. He checked his maps one last time, memorizing the terrain, rivers, forests, ridges, and the likely location of the German guns. He'd have to fly alone. A formation would be too easy to spot, and the element of surprise was everything. He took off just after dawn, the sky still gray and the air cool. Instead of climbing to altitude, Jack leveled off at barely 100 feet, following a winding river that snaked toward the front. The world rushed by in a blur, trees, fields, and villages flashing beneath his wings. Every sense was on high alert. He watched for power lines, flocks of birds, and the telltale glint of enemy vehicles. The P-47's engine thundered, but at this altitude the sound was masked by the terrain. As he neared the front, Jack dropped even lower, skimming the tops of hedgerows and ducking behind a low ridge. He could see the smoke of battle in the distance, shell bursts, burning vehicles, and the faint outline of the German artillery line. He throttled back, slowing to avoid drawing attention, and used a stand of trees to mask his approach. On the ground, the German gunners were focused on the distant Allied lines. Their guns were camouflaged with netting and branches, their positions carefully chosen to avoid detection from the air. They had no idea that death was coming from behind, just a few feet above the ground. Jack's heart pounded as he lined up his attack run. He banked left, using a small hill to hide his final approach, then popped up just enough to clear the trees. The artillery line was right in front of him. Dozens of guns, trucks, and crews, all exposed and unprepared. He opened fire with his 8 50 caliber machine guns, raking the line from end to end. The effect was immediate and devastating. Gunners dove for cover, shells exploded, and vehicles burst into flames. Jack could see men running, some firing wildly, others frozen in shock. He released his bombs, aiming for the center of the battery. The first bomb hit a gun position, sending a geyser of earth and metal skyward. The second struck an ammunition truck, triggering a chain reaction of explosions that tore through the line. The entire area was engulfed in smoke, fire, and chaos. Jack pulled up hard, banking away from the target as flak and small arms fire erupted behind him. He jinked left and right, using the terrain to break up his silhouette and avoid enemy gunners. For a moment, he thought he'd been hit. There was a loud bang and the plane shuddered, but the controls responded, and he realized it was just turbulence from the blast. He circled once, low and fast, to assess the damage. The artillery line was gone, guns destroyed, vehicles burning, and survivors fleeing into the woods. The road behind the position was clogged with wreckage and abandoned equipment. Jack radioed back to base. Target destroyed. Artillery neutralized. Returning home. The flight back was a blur. Jack stayed low, using the same river and tree lines to avoid detection. He kept an eye on his instruments, watching for any sign of damage or overheating. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by exhaustion and a growing sense of disbelief. Had he really pulled it off? Had he really erased an entire artillery line with one daring attack? Back at base, the reaction was electric. Ground crews swarmed the P-47, checking for damage and congratulating Jack on his return. The intelligence officers grilled him for details. How low had he flown? How had he found the target? What had he seen? The answers were simple. I flew as low as I could. I used the terrain. I trusted my instincts. The news spread quickly. Allied troops on the ground, who had been pinned down by the German guns, cheered as the shelling stopped. Commanders radioed their thanks, and Jack's squadron mates treated him like a hero. But the real impact was on the enemy. German survivors reported the attack as a bolt from the blue, a sudden, devastating strike that left them stunned and demoralized. The mission became a legend almost overnight. Other pilots wanted to know how Jack had done it. Some called him reckless, others called him a genius. The debate raged. Was Nap of the Earth flying worth the risk? Should it be taught or banned? For Jack, the answer was clear. Sometimes you have to break the rules to win, he said, but you have to know why you were doing it, and you have to be ready to pay the price. The attack also had a ripple effect on both sides. Allied commanders began to rethink their approach to close air support, encouraging more pilots to use terrain and surprise to their advantage. Training programs were updated to include low-level attack techniques, and new tactics were developed for coordinating air and ground operations. The Germans, meanwhile, scrambled to adapt. Artillery units were ordered to dig in deeper, to camouflage their positions more carefully, and to set up obstacles like cables and poles to deter low-flying planes. Radar operators adjusted their settings, and fighter pilots learned to patrol at lower altitudes. But the damage was done. The myth of the invulnerable artillery line was shattered, and the fear of Nap of the Earth attacks became a constant concern. For Jack, the mission was a turning point. He became a legend in his own squadron, a symbol of what was possible when skill, courage, and a little bit of luck came together. But he also knew the cost. He'd seen the wreckage of planes that hadn't made it, and he never forgot the risks he'd taken. In the end, he believed that Nap of the Earth flying was a tool, one to be used wisely, with respect for the dangers and a clear understanding of the mission. In the next section, we'll look at the aftermath of the attack, how it changed the course of the battle, the reactions from both Allied and German commanders, and the legacy of this legendary mission. We'll also explore how Nap of the Earth tactics influenced future air combat, from Korea and Vietnam to the modern era. The destruction of the German artillery line by Jack Harrison's illegal Nap of the Earth attack sent shockwaves through both Allied and German ranks. For the Allied troops pinned down by relentless shell fire, the sudden silence was almost surreal. Soldiers who had spent days dodging shrapnel and praying for a break now watched in disbelief as smoke rose from the enemy S position and the shelling stopped. For many, it was the first real sign that the tide was turning in their favor. Word of the mission spread quickly through the Allied lines. Infantrymen cheered the pilot they'd never met, and officers radioed their thanks to the airfield. The story grew with every retelling. Some said Jack had flown so low he clipped the tops of trees. Others claimed he'd destroyed not just the guns, but the entire German command post. The truth was dramatic enough. An entire artillery battery wiped out in minutes by a single daring pilot. At headquarters, the reaction was more complicated. Jack's commanding officer was both proud and concerned. On one hand, the mission had been a spectacular success. On the other, it had broken every rule in the book. The colonel called Jack in for a debriefing, his tone a mix of admiration and warning. "You know you could have been killed, right? You know you broke protocol?" Jack nodded. "Yes, sir, but it worked, and I'd do it again if I had to." The intelligence officers were fascinated. They wanted every detail: how Jack had used the terrain, how he'd avoided detection, how he'd lined up his attack. They took notes, drew maps, and began to think about how these tactics could be used in future missions. The idea of nap of the earth flying, once considered too risky, was suddenly on everyone's mind. For the Germans, the attack was a disaster. Survivors described the scene as chaos: guns destroyed, ammunition trucks burning, and soldiers fleeing in every direction. The loss of the artillery line left a gap in the German defenses, allowing Allied troops to advance and secure a key supply route. German commanders were furious and shaken. They ordered immediate changes. Artillery units were to dig in deeper, camouflage more carefully, and set up more anti-aircraft defenses. But the damage was done. The myth of the invulnerable artillery line was shattered. The Luftwaffe, already stretched thin, was ordered to increase patrols and protect ground units from low-level attacks. But with Allied air superiority growing by the day, there simply weren't enough fighters to go around. German anti-aircraft gunners were told to watch for low-flying planes and to set up obstacles, cables, poles, even explosive traps, to deter nap-of-the-earth attacks. But these measures were only partially effective. The element of surprise, combined with the skill and daring of pilots like Jack, made it nearly impossible to stop every attack. Back at the Allied airfield, Jack's squadron was buzzing with excitement. Pilots wanted to know every detail: how low he'd flown, how he'd picked his route, how he'd survived the flak. Some were inspired, eager to try the tactic themselves. Others were skeptical, warning that the risks were too high. The debate raged in the mess hall and the briefing room. Was Jack a hero, a fool, or both? The ground crews who had patched up Jack's P-47 after the mission had their own opinions. They marveled at the skill it took to fly so low, to dodge trees and power lines, and to pull off a perfect attack under fire. They also knew how close Jack had come to disaster. One mechanic joked, "Next time, maybe just drop a postcard on the Germans and come home safe." The mission quickly became the stuff of legend. Other squadrons heard about it, and soon pilots across the front were experimenting with nap-of-the-earth tactics. Training manuals were updated, and instructors began to teach the basics of low-level flight: how to use terrain for cover, how to time an attack, how to escape after a strike. The tactic was still considered risky, but it was now recognized as a powerful tool in the right hands. For Jack, the aftermath was a mix of pride and reflection. He received a commendation for bravery, but he also knew he'd been lucky. He wrote home about the mission, downplaying the danger but sharing the excitement. "We got the guns," he told his family. "It was close, but it worked. I just did what I had to do." The impact of the mission went beyond the immediate battlefield. Allied commanders began to rethink their approach to close air support. They saw the value of giving pilots more flexibility, of encouraging innovation and initiative. The rigid rules that had once governed air attacks were loosened, and pilots were trusted to use their judgment in the heat of battle. The Germans, meanwhile, were forced to adapt. Artillery units became more mobile, moving positions frequently to avoid detection. Camouflage became an art form, with entire batteries hidden under nets, branches, and even fake buildings. Anti-aircraft defenses were strengthened, and new tactics were developed to counter low-level attacks. But the fear of nap-of-the-earth strikes never went away. The mission also had a lasting effect on the men who witnessed it. For the Allied infantry who advanced past the wrecked guns, it was a moment of hope, a sign that the enemy could be beaten, that the tide was turning. For the German survivors, it was a lesson in humility and the unpredictability of war. For Jack and his fellow pilots, it was a reminder that sometimes the boldest moves are the ones that make history. The legend of Jack's illegal attack grew with each retelling. It became a story of courage, skill, and the willingness to break the rules for the greater good. It inspired other pilots to take risks, to trust their instincts, and to believe that one person could make a difference. In the next section, we'll explore how nap-of-the-earth tactics evolved after World War II. We'll look at how these daring maneuvers influenced air combat in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, and how the lessons learned from Jack's mission continue to shape the way pilots fly and fight today. Jack Harrison's legendary low-level attack didn't just change the course of a single battle. It changed the way pilots and commanders thought about air power. The success of his illegal nap-of-the-earth mission proved that daring, skill, and a willingness to break the rules could sometimes achieve what brute force and standard tactics could not. In the years after World War II, the lessons of Jack's mission would echo through the jet age, influencing air combat from Korea to Vietnam and beyond. After the war, air forces around the world took a hard look at what had worked and what hadn't. The value of close air support, precision strikes, and surprise attacks was clear. But so was the danger. Nap-of-the-earth flying was still risky, still controversial, and still not something every pilot could or should attempt. Yet, as new threats emerged and technology advanced, the need for low-level tactics only grew. In the Korean War, the rugged terrain and unpredictable weather made high-altitude bombing less effective. Pilots flying F-51 Mustangs, F-80 Shooting Stars, and later F-86 Sabres found that the best way to hit enemy supply lines, bridges, and artillery was to get down low, sometimes just a few dozen feet above the ground. The lessons of WWII were put to the test as pilots dodged flak, hugged the hills, and used the landscape to mask their approach. The risks were real. Many planes were lost to ground fire or accidents, but the rewards were undeniable. Surprise, accuracy, and the ability to strike where the enemy least expected it became the hallmarks of successful missions. The Vietnam War took nap-of-the-earth tactics to a new level. The dense jungles, winding rivers, and hidden enemy positions made traditional air attacks almost impossible. Helicopter pilots flying UH-1 Hueys and AH-1 Cobras became masters of low-level flight. They used the trees for cover, popped up for quick attacks, and disappeared before the enemy could react. Fixed-wing pilots flying A-1 Sky Raiders, F-100 Super Sabres, and A-4 Skyhawks learned to use nap-of-the-earth approaches to avoid radar-guided missiles and anti-aircraft guns. The introduction of surface-to-air missiles, SAMs, and radar-guided anti-aircraft artillery made low-level flying even more important and even more dangerous. Pilots had to balance the need to stay below radar with the risk of hitting obstacles or being caught in a deadly crossfire. Training became more rigorous. Simulators were developed to teach terrain-following flight, and new technologies like terrain-following radar and heads-up displays gave pilots more tools to survive. The spirit of Jack Harrison's mission lived on in these new generations of pilots. The willingness to take risks, to trust one's instincts, and to use every advantage the terrain offered became part of the culture of air power. Stories of daring, low-level attacks, like the Israeli Air Force's surprise strike on Egyptian airfields in 1967, or the U.S. Air Force's Operation Secret Squirrel during the Gulf War, showed that the lessons of WWII were still relevant. But nap-of-the-earth flying was never just about technology or tactics. It was about the human element, the courage to fly into danger, the skill to read the land, and the judgment to know when to break the rules. Pilots who mastered these skills became legends in their own right, respected by their peers and feared by their enemies. The evolution of nap-of-the-earth tactics also changed the way air forces trained and equipped their pilots. New aircraft were designed with low-level flight in mind, featuring stronger airframes, better visibility, and advanced avionics. Helicopters became a central part of modern militaries, valued for their ability to move troops, deliver supplies, and strike targets in places where fixed-wing aircraft couldn't go. The impact of these tactics was felt not just on the battlefield, but in the way wars were planned and fought. Commanders learned to think in 3 dimensions, to use the air and the ground together, and to exploit every weakness in the enemy's defenses. The line between air and ground operations blurred, and the concept of joint operations became the new standard. For the men who flew these missions, the experience was unforgettable. Many described the thrill of flying just above the treetops, the rush of adrenaline as they dodged enemy fire, and the satisfaction of hitting a target that others thought was untouchable. But they also remembered the fear, the knowledge that a single mistake could be fatal, that every mission was a gamble, and that not everyone would make it home. The legacy of Nap of the Earth flying is still with us today. Modern attack helicopters like the AH-64 Apache and the Russian Mi-28 are designed for low-level terrain-hugging flight. Stealth bombers and fighter jets use advanced sensors and flight computers to follow the contours of the land, avoiding radar and striking deep behind enemy lines. Drones and unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, now carry out many of the same missions, using terrain and technology to stay hidden and deliver precision strikes. But the heart of the tactic remains the same: using the land as a shield, trusting in skill and daring, and striking where the enemy least expects it. The story of Jack Harrison's illegal attack is a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come from those willing to take the biggest risks. As we look to the future, the lessons of Nap of the Earth flying are more relevant than ever. In a world of advanced air defenses, electronic warfare, and ever-changing threats, the ability to adapt, innovate, and use every tool at one's disposal is the key to survival. The pilots who flew low and fast in WWII paved the way for generations of aviators, showing that courage and creativity can change the course of history. In the final section, we'll reflect on the enduring legacy of Jack's mission and the pilots who followed in his footsteps. We'll explore how their stories continue to inspire, what they teach us about leadership and innovation, and why the spirit of Nap of the Earth flying still matters in the modern world. Jack Harrison's illegal Nap of the Earth attack didn't just change the outcome of a single battle. It changed the way generations of pilots, commanders, and military thinkers approached the art of war. As the decades passed, the lessons of that daring mission echoed through the Jet Age, the Cold War, and into the 21st century. In this final section, we'll explore why Nap of the Earth flying still matters, how it continues to shape air combat, and what it teaches us about leadership, innovation, and the human spirit. First, the legacy of Nap of the Earth tactics is everywhere in modern air power. Today's attack helicopters, like the AH-64 Apache and the Eurocopter Tiger, are designed to fly low, using hills, forests, and even urban landscapes to mask their approach. Modern fighter bombers and stealth aircraft use terrain-following radar and advanced avionics to slip past enemy defenses, just as Jack did with his eyes and instincts. Drones and unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, now carry out many of the same missions, using the land as cover to strike targets deep behind enemy lines. The reason is simple: the battlefield is more dangerous than ever. Surface-to-air missiles, radar-guided anti-aircraft guns, and electronic warfare systems make high-altitude attacks risky and often ineffective. The best way to survive and to surprise the enemy is still to get down low, use the terrain, and strike where you're least expected. The same principles that guided Jack's mission in 1944 guide pilots and planners today. But Nap of the Earth flying is about more than just technology. It's about mindset. It's about the willingness to take risks, to trust your training, and to adapt when the situation demands it. Jack's mission was illegal, not because it was foolish, but because it broke with convention. He saw a problem, found a solution, and had the courage to act, even when it meant going against the book. That spirit of innovation, of daring to do what others won't, is at the heart of every great military breakthrough. The story of Jack's attack also teaches us about leadership. Great leaders know when to trust their people, when to give them the freedom to innovate, and when to support them, even if they break the rules. Jack's commanding officer could have punished him for his illegal maneuver. Instead, he recognized the value of initiative and used Jack's success to inspire others. That kind of leadership, flexible, supportive, and focused on results, turns good units into great ones. For the men and women who fly today, the lessons of Nap of the Earth are as relevant as ever. Modern pilots train for low-level flight in simulators and in the real world, learning to read the land, anticipate threats, and make split-second decisions. They know that the difference between success and failure, life and death, often comes down to preparation, teamwork, and the ability to adapt on the fly. The legacy of Jack's mission is also about memory and inspiration. His story, and the stories of those who followed in his footsteps, remind us that history is made by individuals, by people who see a need, take a risk, and refuse to give up. The pilots who flew Nap of the Earth in WWII, Korea, Vietnam, and beyond are part of a long tradition of innovation and courage. Their stories inspire new generations to push the limits, to question the status quo, and to believe that one person can make a difference. In a world that often values conformity and caution, the story of Jack Harrison's illegal attack is a call to action. It challenges us to think differently, to embrace change, and to trust in our own abilities. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest victories come from those who are willing to break the rules for the right reasons. As you finish this documentary, think about what Nap of the Earth flying means to you. Is it a lesson in courage? A reminder of the power of innovation? Or simply a story of one person's determination to do what needed to be done? Whatever it is, let it inspire you to face your own challenges with the same spirit of daring and hope. If you've enjoyed this journey through the story of the illegal Nap of the Earth attack, please like, comment, and subscribe for more untold WWII stories and deep dives into the technology and people that shaped history. What do you think is the most important lesson from Jack's mission? Share your thoughts below. We love hearing your take. Thank you for joining us on this flight through history. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep remembering the real stories behind the legends.